Darius Whitmore stood at the window of his penthouse apartment, the skyline of Manhattan stretching endlessly before him. The city pulsed with energy, a living, breathing entity that had both fueled and tested him throughout his life. He had come a long way from his humble beginnings in Harlem. The luxury empire he had built, Whitmore & Co., now spanned the country, redefining the way people experienced high-end fashion and accessories. His name carried weight in the industry, a testament to his vision and relentless drive. Yet for all his success, Darius knew that the world still saw him a certain way. He had learned long ago that power and wealth did not erase the prejudices embedded in the very fabric of society. Even now, as a billionaire and the CEO of one of the most successful luxury brands in the country, there were people who looked at him and only saw a black man. And to them, that meant he did not belong. A quiet anger simmered in his chest as he recalled the rumors about his flagship store in Soho. It was one of his company's most profitable locations, a beacon of elegance in Manhattan's elite shopping district. But lately, whispers had reached him about the way the store was being run. Customers who did not fit a certain mold were turned away, subtly dismissed, or outright ignored. Some employees had spoken up anonymously, hinting that the manager, Ethan Carlisle, ran the store like a private club for the city's social elite. None of the reports explicitly mentioned race, but Darius knew better. It was always about race. It always had been. Ethan had the numbers to justify his position. His sales figures were outstanding, and his connections with wealthy clients brought in steady revenue. On paper, he was the perfect manager. But numbers never told the whole story. Darius had spent too many years in this business to be blinded by statistics. If the rumors were true, then Ethan was more than just a problem. He was a disease, poisoning the very foundation of what Darius had built. He could have handled this the way any CEO would. He could have called in his regional manager, reviewed the complaints, and quietly removed Ethan from his position. But that was not enough. Darius needed to see it for himself. He needed to walk into his own store and experience what his customers were going through. He turned from the window, his decision made. Later that night, as he rifled through his closet, he allowed himself a bitter smile. The irony of it all was not lost on him. A man who could walk into any of his stores and buy whatever he wanted now had to disguise himself just to be treated fairly. He selected a simple outfit, dark jeans, a plain black hoodie, and sneakers. His Rolex stayed in the drawer. Instead, he chose a basic wristwatch, one that did not scream wealth or status. As he pulled the hood over his head, he studied himself in the mirror. The reflection staring back at him was not the powerful CEO of Whitmore & Company. It was the boy from Harlem who had spent his youth being followed by security guards in department stores. The young man who had been turned away from high-end restaurants because they assumed he could not afford to eat there. The entrepreneur who had been doubted at every turn, forced to prove himself over and over again. Some wounds never truly healed. With a deep breath, he grabbed his keys and stepped out into the night. The streets of Soho were alive with the hum of city life. Tourists, influencers, and socialites wandered in and out of boutique stores, their arms weighed down with designer bags. The sidewalks gleamed under the soft glow of streetlights, and the air was filled with the scent of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee from nearby cafes. Darius walked with purpose, blending into the crowd. He had spent his life moving through spaces where people believed he did not belong. He knew how to navigate them without drawing too much attention to himself. When he reached the entrance of Whitmore & Co., he hesitated for just a moment. The store stood as a symbol of everything he had built, yet tonight it felt foreign. He was not stepping in as its creator but as an outsider. He pushed open the heavy glass doors. The first thing he noticed was the coldness. Not the temperature but the atmosphere. Luxury stores had an unspoken language, a way of making people feel either valued or unwanted. And in that moment, Darius knew which category he had been placed in. The interior was immaculate. Polished marble floors reflected the soft golden glow of the chandeliers. Sleek glass displays housed designer watches, handcrafted leather bags, and elegant jewelry. Everything about the store screamed exclusivity. Yet no one greeted him. The security guard by the door barely glanced at him. The sales associates, dressed in their pristine black uniforms, were engaged in animated conversations with customers who looked the part: men in tailored suits, women in couture dresses. Darius wandered deeper into the store, stopping by a display of luxury watches. He ran his fingers over the glass, examining the craftsmanship. Still, no one approached him. A few feet away, a young white couple was being lavished with attention. Two sales associates hovered around them, eager to assist. Their laughter and polite conversation filled the space around them. Darius turned his attention to a collection of high-end leather bags, lifting one from the display to inspect the stitching. The moment his fingers brushed against the smooth material, he felt it. A shift in the air, a presence moving toward him with measured steps. He turned slightly, catching sight of a tall, clean-cut man in a tailored suit. Ethan Carlyle. The store manager carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the space around him. His sharp eyes scanned Darius, his lips pressing into a thin line. Ethan did not see a potential customer. He saw a black man in a hoodie touching a $5,000 bag. And that was all he needed to know. Darius felt the weight of the moment before Ethan even spoke. "Can I help you with something?" Ethan's tone was clipped, professional but lacking warmth. Darius looked up, meeting his gaze. "Just browsing." Ethan's eyes flicked over his clothing, his expression unreadable. "That's quite an expensive item," he said. "Are you sure it's in your price range?" There it was. Not even subtle. Darius kept his expression neutral. He had dealt with this type of arrogance his whole life. "I'm aware of the price," he replied evenly. "I'll let you know if I need assistance." Ethan did not move. He folded his arms, his stance shifting slightly forward. "I just want to make sure you understand. This isn't the kind of store where people browse for fun. It's a high-end establishment, and we cater to serious buyers." Darius felt his grip tighten around the bag's handle. A slow breath kept his anger at bay. "I think I know what kind of store this is," he said quietly. The silence between them thickened. Darius saw the flicker of impatience in Ethan's eyes. A decision was made. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We don't allow loitering, and if you're not here to buy something, you're wasting my time." Darius stared at him for a long moment. This was not the first time he had been kicked out of a store. It was not even the 10th. But this time it was not just any store. This was his store. The irony was almost laughable. Almost. Slowly, deliberately, Darius placed the bag back on the display. He straightened his hoodie, adjusted his watch, and looked Ethan in the eye. He nodded once. Then he turned and walked away. As he reached the exit, he heard Ethan's voice behind him, dripping with smug satisfaction. "Have a nice day." Darius stepped out onto the bustling street, the cool night air hitting him like a slap. He stood still for a moment, letting the tension drain from his body. Every ounce of his self-control kept him from marching back in and revealing exactly who he was. He imagined the look on Ethan's face when he realized the man he had just thrown out was the one who signed his paychecks. But tonight was not the night for that. Darius was a businessman, and a good businessman knew how to wait for the right moment to strike. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his assistant, a reminder of his board meeting the next morning. Darius allowed himself a small smile. Tomorrow things would change. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Darius Whitmore's penthouse, casting long golden beams across the polished hardwood floors. The city was already alive beneath him, a chaotic yet mesmerizing symphony of honking taxis, hurried pedestrians, and the distant hum of life in Manhattan. Darius stood in front of his mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his navy blue suit. The fabric hugged his broad shoulders perfectly, a custom design from one of his own luxury lines. Every detail had been crafted with precision, from the subtle sheen of the silk lining to the fine stitching along the seams. His shoes gleamed under the light, their polished leather reflecting his unwavering resolve. He was a man who had built an empire from nothing, and today he would remind the world exactly who he was. Last night had replayed in his mind over and over again. Every word, every dismissive glance, every subtle insult wrapped in condescension. Ethan Carlyle had not just kicked him out of his own store. He had done so with the casual ease of a man who believed he was untouchable. A man who thought he knew the rules of the world and had decided that Darius did not belong within them. That would change today. Darius picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. Lauren answered immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." "Morning, Lauren. I want a company-wide meeting scheduled for next week. Mandatory attendance for all managers, all locations. Diversity and inclusion training." There was a brief pause before she responded. "I assume this has something to do with your visit last night?" Darius exhaled slowly. "It has everything to do with it. I'll make the arrangements," Lauren said, her voice professional but tinged with something else. Approval. "Good. Also, I'll be visiting the Soho store today. I want Ethan and the entire staff ready when I arrive." This time, she didn't hesitate. "Understood." Darius ended the call, slipped on his watch, and grabbed his keys. Today was not just about Ethan Carlyle. It was about setting a precedent. At exactly noon, a black luxury SUV pulled up outside Whitmore & Co.'s Soho store. The doors opened smoothly, and Darius stepped out, his presence commanding attention without effort. His suit, his posture, the controlled ease in which he moved, it all spoke of power. He did not need to announce who he was. The moment he entered, the store would know. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. The employees had been briefed hours ago. They knew their CEO was making a surprise visit, and they had scrambled to ensure everything was perfect. Displays had been meticulously arranged, shelves dusted to perfection, and every sales associate had been coached on how to conduct themselves. Ethan Carlyle stood near the entrance, his usual air of self-importance amplified by the knowledge that the man who signed his paychecks was about to walk through the doors. He smoothed down his suit, ensuring not a single wrinkle disrupted his polished image. His goal today was simple: impress Darius Whitmore. Show him that the Soho store was running flawlessly under his leadership. Then the doors swung open. Darius stepped inside. The difference in atmosphere was immediate. The same employees who had ignored him the night before were now suddenly attentive, their smiles bright and eager. He watched the way they carried themselves, how their posture had shifted from indifferent to alert. He noticed the sudden effort in their voices as they greeted him. And at the center of it all was Ethan. The manager's broad smile stretched across his face as he stepped forward, his hand extended. "Mr. Whitmore, welcome to the Soho store. It's an honor to have you here." Darius took the offered handshake, gripping it firmly. He saw the flicker of confusion in Ethan's eyes, the momentary hesitation in his grip. There was something there, some sliver of recognition he could not quite place. "I've heard a lot about this location," Darius said, his voice smooth and deliberate. "I wanted to see how things are running." Ethan straightened, his chest puffing slightly. "We run a tight ship here. Our clients expect nothing but the best, and we make sure to deliver." Darius let his gaze sweep the store. Everything was pristine, the luxury atmosphere carefully curated. But he wasn't here for appearances. He was here for the truth. "I had an interesting experience here yesterday," he said, his voice measured. "You see, I came in looking for a new bag, and I didn't get quite the warm welcome I was expecting." Ethan's smile wavered. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding." Darius tilted his head slightly. "No misunderstanding," he said. "You personally escorted me out." Ethan's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The realization struck him like a slap. Darius watched the emotions flicker across his face. Shock, disbelief, then a growing panic. His confident posture faltered, his hands twitching slightly at his sides. I didn't realize," Ethan stammered. Darius held up a hand, cutting him off. "And that's exactly the problem." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Every employee in the store was listening now, though they pretended to be occupied with their work. Ethan swallowed hard. "Mr. Whitmore, Darius turned slightly, looking around the store. "Tell me something, Ethan. How many other customers have you turned away? How many people have walked through these doors only to be treated like they didn't belong?" Ethan's face burned red. "That's not what happened." "That's exactly what happened." Darius's voice was calm, controlled, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath it. "You saw a black man in a hoodie and decided he wasn't worth your time. You didn't bother to ask questions. You made a judgment. And last night I let you believe you were right. But today, I'm here to remind you exactly who I am." Ethan's breathing was shallow, his entire body tense. "Mr. Whitmore, please." Darius exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "I could fire you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I could have security escort you out of here the way you did to me. And honestly, you deserve it." Ethan flinched. "But I'm not going to." The words took a second to register. Ethan's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope. Darius let the moment hang before he continued. "You're going to stay. And for the next month, you're going to personally greet every single customer who walks through that door. Doesn't matter what they look like, what they're wearing, or whether they seem like they can afford to shop here. You will treat them all with the same level of respect you would give to the richest client you've ever served." Ethan blinked rapidly, his breath uneven. Darius stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Ethan could hear. "If I hear about you treating another customer the way you treated me, you're done. And I don't just mean here. I mean in this industry. I will make sure you never work in luxury retail again." Ethan nodded, his expression one of pure defeat. "I understand." Darius studied him for a long moment, then turned to the rest of the staff. "This is not just about one person," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "This is about the way we do business. Whitmore & Co. was built on the idea that luxury is an experience for everyone, not just an exclusive few. If you work here, you will uphold that standard. If you can't, you will not be working here for long. The employees stood frozen, absorbing his words. Darius glanced at Ethan one last time, then turned and walked toward the back of the store, where his regional manager, Rebecca Hayes, stood watching. Rebecca smirked slightly. That was quite the show. Darius sighed. I didn't do it for theatrics. She nodded. I know. We need to do more, he said. A company-wide training program. Every manager, every staff member. We need to make sure this never happens again. Rebecca crossed her arms. Already working on it. Darius gave her a nod of approval, then exhaled slowly. Today had been a statement, not just to Ethan, not just to this store, but to the entire company. Darius Whitmore leaned back in his office chair, staring out over the Manhattan skyline. The events of the past 24 hours played over in his mind like a film on repeat. The dismissive look on Ethan Carlisle's face, the sting of being treated like an outsider in his own store, the way Ethan's confidence had shattered when he realized the truth. It should have satisfied him, but it didn't. Power was not about revenge. It was about change. He had spent years fighting to create something different, a brand that welcomed all people, not just the privileged few. If Ethan's behavior was a symptom of something deeper, then firing him would not solve the problem. It would be easy, too easy. But Darius had learned long ago that easy solutions rarely led to real progress. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Lauren stepped inside, her presence as sharp and professional as ever. She carried a tablet in one hand, her expression neutral, but he could see the curiosity in her eyes. You made quite the statement today, she said, setting the tablet down on his desk. The entire corporate team is buzzing about what happened at the Soho store. Darius sighed, rubbing his temple. I didn't do it for spectacle, Lauren. I needed them to understand. She nodded. And they do. But you also know this is going to spread. Employees talk. Word gets around. Good, Darius said. Let them talk. Lauren studied him for a moment before tilting the tablet toward him. Speaking of talking, our PR team has already flagged the incident. A few customers witnessed what happened. A blogger who was in the store wrote a vague post about watching a luxury CEO dismantle discrimination in real time. It's gaining traction. If the press gets wind of it, you need to decide how you want to handle the narrative. Darius considered that for a moment. He had not thought about the public perception of what he had done. He had acted on principle, not for publicity. But he also understood the power of perception. If this became a headline, he needed to ensure the message was clear. Let it unfold naturally, he said. If the media picks it up, we won't run from it. But I don't want to turn this into some corporate PR stunt. The moment it looks performative, the real message is lost. Lauren smirked slightly. A CEO who actually cares about authenticity. What a concept. Darius exhaled through his nose, a small hint of amusement flickering across his face. Anything else? She hesitated before tapping on the tablet again. The new diversity and inclusion training program is ready for approval. I fast-tracked it after your call this morning. It's comprehensive, but I'd like you to take a look before we roll it out. Darius took the tablet, skimming through the document. The program covered everything: bias awareness, customer inclusivity, corporate responsibility. It was well thought out, but it needed more than just mandatory training. I want leadership involved directly, he said. Not just managers. I want corporate executives attending these sessions too. If we're going to fix the culture, it has to start from the top. Lauren nodded. Understood. I'll make the adjustments. Darius set the tablet down. And Ethan? Rebecca is keeping an eye on him. He was visibly shaken after you left the store. From what she reported, he's already started making an effort to be more engaged with every customer who walks in. Humility does interesting things to people. Darius pressed his fingers together in thought. He had no illusions about Ethan suddenly transforming overnight, but he was willing to see if the man could truly change. He had given him an opportunity, but he would not give him a second chance if he failed. Make sure he follows through, Darius said. And if he slips up, I want him gone immediately. Lauren gave a sharp nod before standing. Will do. As she left the office, Darius turned back to the window. The city stretched out before him, endless, filled with millions of people who had fought their own battles, faced their own versions of discrimination, exclusion, and judgment. He had done what he could today, but the fight was far from over. 3 weeks later, Darius found himself standing outside the Soho store once again. This time he wore no disguise, no hoodie, no attempt to blend into the background. He was simply Darius Whitmore, CEO, stepping into his own store with a quiet sense of curiosity. The first difference he noticed was the energy. It was subtle, but it was there. The staff moved differently, their interactions with customers more natural, more welcoming. He watched as a young black woman in casual clothing walked through the doors and was immediately greeted by a sales associate. A genuine smile, a respectful tone. Good. Darius took his time wandering through the store, observing. The employees were engaged. There was no tension in the air. It felt like a place that was truly open to all, not just a curated selection of clientele. Then he saw Ethan. The manager stood near the back of the store, speaking to an older gentleman browsing a selection of watches. His demeanor was different. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced with something quieter, more measured. When the customer asked a question, Ethan listened. He responded with patience. There was no trace of the dismissiveness Darius had seen that first night. It was not redemption, not yet, but it was a start. Ethan turned slightly, his eyes scanning the store, and that was when he saw Darius. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Ethan's face paled slightly, but he did not panic. He did not shrink. Instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Darius returned it. He continued browsing for another 10 minutes before making his way toward the exit. A young sales associate approached him as he neared the door. Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you with anything today? Darius smiled. Just browsing. Thank you. She nodded politely and stepped back. No assumption. No dismissal. Just professional courtesy. Outside, the crisp autumn air greeted him as he stepped onto the sidewalk. The battle had not ended in one day. It never would. Change took time, took intention. But today he had proof that it was possible. That was enough. For now.